The sun hung low in the western sky, casting a golden haze across the dust-choked clearing where the market had sprung to life. Heat shimmered above the trampled earth, carrying with it the smell of sweat, leather, and desperation. Voices clashed in sharp, cutting tones, men haggling over trade as if they were bartering for cattle or broken tools rather than human souls. The crowd pressed tighter as word spread that the tribe, battered by hunger and drought, had brought something different today. 3 women stood at the center, flanked by 2 weary warriors who looked ashamed to be there at all. Their faces were drawn, shoulders slumped beneath the burden of what they had been ordered to do. The women were not bound, but the hopelessness in their eyes made chains unnecessary. Elena, the eldest of the 3, squared her shoulders despite the jeering eyes around her. Her dark hair, loose and tangled, framed a face that was far too proud for the place she had been forced into. She stood tall, defiant even as her lips trembled. To her right, Marisol placed a steadying hand on her arm. Slightly older, broader of build, Marisol's presence carried a protective weight, like a wall of strength standing between Elena and the cruelty of the world. And there, clinging tightly to Marisol's other hand, was Isabella, barely more than a girl. Her wide eyes darted nervously at every sound, every movement, her small frame trembling as though she might collapse at any moment. "Fine stock," one trader barked with a grin that showed more missing teeth than present. He shoved a thumb toward the sisters. "The tall one'll fetch a high price." "Strong hips, good for bearing children." Another man spat into the dust and laughed. "That fiery one, aye, she'll need breaking in. But once she learns her place." Elena's eyes flashed like sparks, her lips parting in a hissed breath. Marisol squeezed her hand sharply, warning her not to speak, but Elena's spirit was too wild, too unbending. "You speak of me as though I'm a horse to be saddled," she snapped, her voice trembling but steady. "I will not be anyone's possession." The laughter that rose in answer was cruel, loud, echoing across the clearing. The traders loved nothing more than defiance. They fed on it, like wolves circling a stag that still kicked at the dirt. "Listen to her," one man jeered. "She'll fight you all the way to the bed. Might make her worth more coin." Isabella pressed her face into Marisol's sleeve, trying to hide from the coarse words. Marisol's heart thundered with fury, but she pulled her younger sister closer, whispering soothing words in her ear. Elena, however, burned with fury. If her hands had been free, she might have struck one of them then and there, even knowing it would only end in her punishment. The crowd thickened. Merchants, drifters, ranch hands, and townfolk gathered, their gazes greedy and unkind. Most had no true intention of buying. They came to watch, to laugh, to feed off the spectacle of humiliation. An elder from the tribe stood at the edge, his eyes hollow. He had not wanted this, but hunger had driven the decision. The people needed food, needed tools, and these young women, though kin, had been deemed the price of survival. His hands shook as he tried to keep his dignity, as if by standing straight he might shield his people from the shame of what was happening. The bidding began. Numbers were called, items offered, rifles, horses, sacks of grain. The warriors shifted uneasily as each offer reduced the women before them into objects. Isabella whimpered softly, hiding her face. Marisol bent low, whispering fiercely, "Stay strong, little one. No matter where they send us, we will survive. I will protect you." But Elena's voice cut sharp again. "No one will own us," she said, though her voice was swallowed by the noise of men's laughter and the bark of numbers rising. Then, over the din, came the sound that silenced all others, the heavy thud of hooves pounding against the hard earth. Dust rose as a rider approached from the horizon, a lone figure atop a powerful chestnut stallion. The crowd parted instinctively, muttering, some scoffing, others watching with a mix of curiosity and annoyance. The horse slowed, stamping as the rider drew near. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered though stooped slightly with age. His hair, once dark, had gone mostly silver, and the lines etched deep across his face spoke of decades under the sun. years of loss and toil. His eyes, however, were keen, sharp as a hawk's, carrying the weight of authority. Samuel Callahan, the old rancher. For years he had been known as a solitary figure, tending his wide acres alone after his wife's death. The townsfolk whispered about him. Some pitied his loneliness, others mocked his stubborn independence, but no one could deny his presence. When Samuel rode into a place, people noticed. He dismounted with surprising strength for his age, his boots hitting the earth with a thud that sent a ripple through the gathered crowd. He stood tall, his weathered hat casting shadow across his piercing eyes. For a long moment he surveyed the scene. The frightened sisters, the greedy traders, the humiliated warriors, and the restless crowd. His jaw tightened, and a storm seemed to gather in his silence. Then his voice rang out, deep and commanding. "Stop!" The word cracked like thunder. The bidding ceased. The crowd turned toward him, muttering. Samuel's gaze did not waver as he stepped closer, his spurs clinking faintly. He pointed a rough, calloused hand toward the three women. "I'm going to buy those three women," he declared, his voice steady, unyielding. "Without them, I'd be dead." A hush fell, confusion spreading like wildfire. Men glanced at one another, frowning, unsure if they'd heard correctly. Laughter broke the silence, sharp and mocking. "Buy them, is it?" One trader sneered. "What use does an old man like you have for three young women?" Another cackled. "Maybe he thinks he's 20 again." But Samuel's eyes narrowed, his jaw setting like stone. He did not flinch at the ridicule. He stepped forward, pulled a pouch from his coat, and tossed it into the dust at the elder's feet. The clinking of silver coins rang out, undeniable, unmistakable. The elder stared at the pouch, his lips trembling, his eyes lifted to Samuel. And for a moment there was recognition. Memory, long ago, when Samuel had nearly frozen in a blizzard. It had been the tribe who found him, nursed him back from the brink. Perhaps this was why he had come now, to pay a debt. No one else spoke. The clink of coins echoed in the silence, the air thick with tension. Finally, the elder bent down, lifted the pouch, and nodded slowly. His voice was heavy, sorrowful. "Take them. May their lives be better under your care." The sisters stood frozen, disbelief written across their faces. Elena's eyes burned with suspicion, Marisol's with guarded hope, and Isabella's with a flicker of fear mixed with relief. Samuel stepped toward them, his expression softening slightly. He removed his hat, bowing his head ever so slightly, as though acknowledging their humanity in a place that had tried to strip it away. "Come," he said quietly, his voice no longer thunder but something gentler. "You'll ride with me. You're safe now." The sisters exchanged glances. Elena hesitated, her chin lifting proudly, even in uncertainty. Marisol pulled Isabella close, nodding to her younger sister. Together, slowly, they moved forward. As they passed through the crowd, men muttered, some laughing, others shaking their heads in disbelief. "Foolish old man," one spat. "He'll regret it soon enough." Samuel ignored them. He helped the women onto his horse, lifting each with surprising strength, then mounted behind them. The chestnut stallion shifted restlessly, sensing its master's tension. Without another word, Samuel spurred the horse forward. Dust rose behind them as they rode away from the market, leaving behind the jeers, the laughter, the greed. The sisters clung to each other, their hearts pounding. Hope and fear warred within them. They did not know what kind of man this old rancher truly was. Would he be protector or captor, savior or another form of master? Only time would tell. But as the market faded behind them, one truth was clear. Their fate had changed forever. And the man who now held the reins carried both the weight of their fear and the fragile promise of their freedom. The journey from the market to the ranch stretched long across the plains. The horse's steady rhythm, a drumbeat beneath the vast, endless sky. The three sisters clung together, hardly daring to breathe, uncertain of what awaited them. Samuel rode in silence, his weathered face set like stone, though his eyes remained vigilant, scanning the horizon as though danger might appear at any moment. Elena sat stiffly, her chin lifted, trying not to show her unease. Every sway of the horse made Isabella grip Marisol tighter, the girl's knuckles white with fear. Marisol whispered steady words into her ear, but her own heart beat wildly. None of them could trust the strange man who had taken them. He had paid for them. Wasn't that the same as ownership? His silver had bought their freedom from one set of hands, only to place them into another. Hours later, the outline of the ranch came into view. A wide spread of land stretched before them, a mixture of rolling fields and weathered fences. The house stood at the center, 2 stories of aged wood, sturdy though worn, with a porch that faced the horizon. A barn leaned against the wind nearby, and pastures spread out, dotted with cattle that grazed in the fading light. The horse slowed as Samuel guided it into the yard. He dismounted first, his movements slow but steady, then offered his hand to the women. Elena ignored the gesture, sliding down without his help. Marisol followed, lowering Isabella gently to the ground. Samuel said nothing, only nodded once, then led the horse to the corral. The sisters stood together, their eyes darting around, unsure if this place was a prison or sanctuary. The house loomed before them, its windows catching the light of the setting sun. It was quiet here, eerily so. No voices, no laughter, no sign of life beyond the cattle in the fields and the restless rustle of wind through the grass. Samuel returned after stabling the horse. "Come inside," he said simply. His voice held no demand, only quiet expectation. Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke and dust, the faint lingering of meals long past. The rooms were tidy but worn, every surface speaking of years lived without company. A fireplace dominated the main room, its ashes cold, as though it hadn't been used in weeks. Chairs sat neatly pushed beneath the table, but the silence around them was heavy, as if they'd been waiting for voices that never came. Samuel gestured toward the hearth. "You'll find it warmer here. The nights drop cold." The sisters exchanged glances, still uncertain. Isabella clung to Marisol's sleeve. Elena lifted her chin, her gaze locking on Samuel's. "What do you want from us?" she asked, her tone sharp. Samuel met her eyes without flinching. "Nothing but that you eat, rest, and live as free women under my roof." Elena's brow furrowed. "Free? You paid for us." His jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained calm. "I paid to keep you from worse men. You're not mine. Not in the way they would have made you. You'll work if you choose. Stay if you choose. Leave when you're ready, if that's what you want." Silence fell. Marisol studied him carefully, searching for falsehood in his tone. Isabella's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of hope breaking through her fear. But Elena only crossed her arms, unwilling to trust so easily. Samuel turned toward the kitchen. "Food's in the pantry. You'll find flour, beans, dried meat. I'll bring in fresh milk by morning. You'll have your own room upstairs. I'll sleep down here by the fire." He left them then, giving them space as he fetched water from outside. Marisol was the first to move, her practical nature urging her forward. She explored the small pantry, finding jars and sacks just as Samuel had said. Isabella hovered at her side, curious but timid. Elena, however, remained rooted in place, her eyes flicking across the room. She studied the details, the worn Bible on the shelf, the rocking chair near the fire, the folded quilt draped neatly as though waiting for hands that would never use it again. She realized then that this was a house long emptied of warmth. Later, Samuel returned with water and set it by the hearth. He lit the fire, its glow filling the room at last. The sisters sat together at the table, unsure of their place. Samuel ate little, leaving most of the food untouched for them. He said nothing more, his silence both heavy and strangely respectful. That night, the sisters climbed the stairs to the room Samuel had pointed out. 3 small beds waited, simple but clean, with quilts folded neatly at the foot. Isabella clung to her sisters as they lay down, whispering, "Do you think he means what he says?" Marisol brushed hair from her forehead. "We'll see, but for now, we're safe." Elena stared at the ceiling, her thoughts restless. She could not trust the old rancher. No man spent silver without expecting something in return. Yet, something in his eyes had not been like the others. There had been no hunger there, no cruelty. Only something else she could not name. The following days unfolded slowly, marked by small steps of change. Samuel rose early each morning, tending cattle and mending fences. He worked with the same quiet determination as he had spoken, neither asking nor commanding the sisters to help. Yet one by one, they began to find their places. Marisol, restless indoors, followed Samuel outside one morning. She asked questions about the livestock, and when he offered a quiet answer, she found herself learning more than she expected. Soon, she was carrying buckets, helping mend broken posts. Her sleeves rolled up as though she'd been born to it. Samuel said little, but the faintest glimmer of respect passed through his eyes. Isabella wandered the yard until she found the garden near the back of the house. Once it had been cared for, but weeds now choked the rows. She knelt in the dirt, pulling at the stubborn roots, humming softly as she worked. Samuel watched from a distance, saying nothing, but later he left a small wooden box of seeds on the porch where she would find it. Isabella smiled for the first time in weeks when she discovered it, clutching the box to her chest. Elena remained guarded. She cooked meals out of necessity, moving around the kitchen with sharp movements, as though daring Samuel to say something critical. He never did. Instead, he offered small thanks when he sat at the table, his words plain but sincere. One evening, when she tore her dress on a splintered chair, Samuel quietly took the fabric to mend it. His stitches were clumsy, uneven, but the effort spoke louder than words. Elena found herself at a loss, unsure how to answer such unexpected kindness. At night, the sisters whispered in their beds. Isabella's voice carried excitement about the garden. Marisol spoke of the cattle and the strength of the land, but Elena remained quiet. She could not deny the house felt safer than she had expected, yet she refused to let her guard fall. The town, however, was less forgiving. News traveled quickly, and soon whispers spread through the saloon and general store. The old rancher had brought 3 women to live under his roof. Men laughed, women gossiped, and stories twisted until Samuel was painted as both fool and sinner. By the time Samuel rode into town with Elena and Marisol to fetch supplies, the stares were sharp, the whispers louder. Elena bristled, her temper rising. One man muttered loudly enough for her to hear, "3 of 'em under his roof. Guess he's not so old after all." Elena turned sharply, her eyes blazing. "Better he than you," she snapped before Marisol pulled her away. Samuel said nothing, his jaw set as he loaded the supplies. Yet inside, a strange warmth stirred. The girl who had distrusted him most had defended his name. The days grew into weeks. The ranch no longer echoed with silence, but with the sounds of work, of voices, of laughter slipping in between. Samuel found himself pausing sometimes, listening to the sisters chatter, the sound filling the emptiness that had haunted the house for too many years. Still, the line between them remained uncertain. Savior and rescued, host and guests, strangers bound by circumstance. Samuel never forgot the weight of their mistrust, and the sisters never forgot the silver that had changed their fates. But piece by piece, something unspoken began to grow, and though none of them could name it yet, the lonely house on the plains had begun to breathe again. The first hints of spring crept slowly across the plains, though the nights still carried the bite of winter. Samuel's ranch stirred with new life. The cattle grew restless in the warming air, the soil loosened beneath Isabella's eager hands, and the house itself seemed to shed its silence, replaced by the soft hum of voices and the rhythm of daily tasks. Yet beyond the ranch fences, whispers spread like wildfire, and those whispers followed Samuel and the 3 women into town. The trip was necessary. Supplies had run low: flour, salt, tools, even seed for the fields. Samuel hitched the wagon at dawn, his broad shoulders moving with quiet determination as he loaded empty sacks and crates. Marisol insisted on coming along, Her stubbornness matched the set of her jaw as she declared she'd not let him carry everything himself. Elena joined as well, not because she wished to, but because her fiery pride refused to let others stare at her sisters without her watchful eye. Isabella remained behind, promising to tend the garden and feed the chickens. The road to town was long, dust rising in soft clouds beneath the wheels. Samuel drove the wagon in silence, the reins steady in his hands, while Marisol kept busy sorting a list of supplies she'd scrawled in rough letters. Elena sat stiff beside her, her eyes fixed on the horizon, though her thoughts churned like a storm. When they reached town, it was as though the air thickened. Heads turned as the wagon rolled down the main street. Men outside the saloon leaned against posts, their laughter sharp as knives. Women at the general store lowered their voices, whispering behind gloved hands. Children stared wide-eyed before being pulled back by their mothers. Samuel ignored them all, as he always did. His boots struck the boards of the porch outside the general store with a steady rhythm. Marisol climbed down beside him, chin high, daring anyone to speak. Elena lingered a step behind, her fists clenched at her sides. Inside, the store smelled of molasses and leather. The owner, a round man with thinning hair, glanced up from behind the counter. His eyes flicked toward the sisters, then back to Samuel. A flicker of disapproval passed across his face before he forced a thin smile. "Morning, Callahan," he said. "What can I get for you today?" "Flour, salt, 2 sacks of oats, new harness leather if you've got it." Samuel's voice was flat, unbothered. The man scribbled a note, then cleared his throat. "And for the ladies?" His tone carried a sting, as though the word ladies was too generous. Before Samuel could answer, Elena stepped forward. "We'll take needles, thread, and sugar," she said firmly. Her voice carried enough edge to make the storekeeper glance up in surprise. Marisol added, "And more soap. The last bar won't last the week." The storekeeper hesitated, his lips twitching. My. Busy household you've got there, Callahan. Never thought I'd see the day you'd expand." The words dripped with insinuation. Samuel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Elena, however, bristled. Better under his roof than under the boots of men who laugh at suffering. She snapped. The store went silent. 2 men near the barrels of grain turned their heads, smirking. One chuckled. "Spirited one, ain't she? Must keep you lively, old man." Samuel's eyes darkened, but still he did not answer. He only placed his coins on the counter with deliberate calm. The storekeeper cleared his throat, busied himself with gathering supplies. Outside, as they loaded the wagon, Elena's anger still burned hot. "You let them mock you," she said, her voice sharp. "You should have answered." Samuel tightened the harness, his movements steady. "Words are wind," he said. "I've got no need to fight the wind." Elena's eyes narrowed. "Easy for you to say. You've lived with your name your whole life. We've lived with chains." Marisol touched her arm, murmuring, "Enough, Elena." But Samuel only met Elena's glare with calm patience. For a moment, the fire in her eyes faltered. She turned away, but the thought lingered. The ride back was quiet, save for the creak of wheels and the cry of hawks overhead. Marisol leaned against the wagon's side, her mind already turning toward the chores ahead. Elena folded her arms, lost in restless thoughts. Samuel drove on, his eyes fixed on the long road home. At the ranch, Isabella ran to meet them, her cheeks smudged with dirt, her hands clutching a bundle of green shoots. "Look!" she cried, her voice bright. "The first sprouts! The garden will grow!" Marisol smiled, brushing a hand through her sister's hair. Even Elena's lips softened, just slightly. Samuel's gaze lingered on Isabella's excitement, and though he said nothing, the corner of his mouth curved in the faintest shadow of a smile. That evening, the house filled with new scents. Elena baked bread with the fresh flour, her hands moving deftly though her shoulders remained tense. Marisol simmered beans with a pinch of salt, humming under her breath. Isabella set the table, chattering about the garden. Samuel sat at the far end, silent as ever. but something about the glow of lamplight on the women's faces stirred a warmth he hadn't felt in years. Still, unease lingered. Elena caught his gaze more than once, her eyes sharp, as though searching for a crack in his calm exterior. Marisol watched the way he carried his weight, noting the stiffness in his shoulders from years of labor. Isabella, though, smiled freely, her trust blooming faster than her sisters could allow. The days stretched into weeks. Slowly, patterns formed. Samuel rose before dawn, tending cattle and fences. Marisol followed often, her strength surprising even him as she hauled water, carried hay, and wrangled stubborn livestock. She teased him sometimes, calling him old man, but her tone carried no malice. Isabella transformed the garden, her laughter spilling across the yard as shoots turned to rows of green. She pressed flowers into jars, left them on the windowsills, their colors chasing away the gloom. Elena kept to the kitchen at first, though her pride bristled at the thought of woman's work. Yet she found herself kneading bread, stirring stews, setting the table. Samuel never commanded it. She simply could not stand to see him eat in silence, his meals plain and joyless. She added herbs, found ways to make even dried beans taste like a feast. The first time Samuel muttered, "Good." After a bite, something strange fluttered in her chest. One evening, a storm rolled across the plains. Wind battered the shutters, rain drummed the roof. Inside, the fire burned bright, casting shadows across the walls. The sisters huddled together at the hearth, Isabella half asleep against Marisol's shoulder. Elena sat apart, staring at the flames, her thoughts restless. Samuel worked quietly in the corner, mending tack. Finally, Elena spoke. "Why did you really take us?" Samuel paused, the leather strap in his hands. His voice, when it came, was low. "Because once, long ago, I was left to die in a storm. And it was your people who saved me. I owed them. And I couldn't stand by while men treated you like beasts." Elena studied him, searching his face for lies. She found none. Only lines carved deep by loss, by solitude, by honesty too heavy to fake. She turned back to the fire, her voice softer. "You've given us more than most would, but don't think that makes us yours." Samuel's hands stilled. His gaze met hers, steady and calm. "I don't want you to be mine. I just want you to live." The storm raged outside, but inside, a silence deeper than thunder filled the room. Elena's eyes burned, though she did not know why. She turned away, hiding the sudden sting. From that night on, something shifted. The mistrust did not vanish, but cracks formed in the walls she'd built. She found herself watching him in quiet moments, when he lifted a calf with surprising strength, when he paused to rub his aching shoulder, when he sat on the porch, staring at the horizon with a loneliness so profound it seeped into the air. She told herself it was only curiosity, but her heart whispered otherwise. And as spring deepened, as laughter began to echo through the ranch that had once known only silence, the sparks of something unspoken began to glow. The summer air lay heavy over the plains, thick with heat and the hum of cicadas. Days stretched long and restless, the sun blazing down on the wide fields, baking the earth until cracks split across the soil. The cattle grew restless, wandering close to the shaded trees, and the horses flicked their tails against the swarms of gnats. At the ranch, the sisters kept busy. Isabella's garden had burst into green rows, beans climbing their stakes, squash curling fat along the ground. Marisol worked side by side with Samuel, hauling water, repairing fences, her sleeves rolled up and her brow slick with sweat. Elena tended the kitchen and the storeroom, though she found herself often glancing through the window, her eyes drawn to Samuel as he moved across the fields. The ranch had begun to feel alive, each corner filled with the sounds of work and laughter, but the peace was fragile. Rumors drifted like smoke on the wind. Travelers passing through town carried word of raiders, bands of men who preyed on isolated homesteads, taking cattle, horses, and worse. Samuel heard the whispers and said nothing, but he began to check the fences more often, kept his rifle cleaned and loaded by the door. The sisters noticed the quiet tension in his movements, the way his eyes lingered longer on the horizon. One evening, as the sun bled into the plains in streaks of orange and crimson, Elena found him sitting on the porch, the rifle across his knees. She stepped outside, brushing flour from her hands. "You've been watching the horizon like it owes you an answer," she said softly. Samuel lifted his gaze to her, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat. "Trouble has a way of finding places like this. I'd rather be ready than caught blind." Elena folded her arms, leaning against the post. "Is it raiders?" He didn't answer at first. Finally, he said, "Yes." She swallowed, her throat dry. She thought of Isabella's laughter in the garden, of Marisol's stubborn pride as she wrestled with fence posts. She thought of the men in town, the cruelty in their eyes. If raiders came, they would not only come for cattle. "What will we do?" she asked. Samuel's voice was steady. "We'll fight if we have to." That night he showed them how. He set up bottles on the fence and handed Marisol a rifle. She frowned at the weight, but her determination was iron. Elena followed, her hands shaking as she took the weapon, but when she pulled the trigger and the bottle shattered, fire lit her eyes. Even Isabella, though frightened, watched with wide attention as Samuel showed them how to load and aim. "Don't be afraid of the sound," he told them. "Fear makes your hands weak. Hold steady, breathe slow, trust yourselves." Days passed, heavy with waiting. The sisters worked, but their laughter grew softer, their eyes darting toward the horizon as Samuel's did. At night, he walked the yard with the rifle in hand, his boots crunching in the dirt, the moon casting long shadows. The attack came in the deep hours of night. It began with the dogs barking, sharp and frantic. Then came the thunder of hooves, the shout of men carried on the wind. Samuel was already on his feet when the first torch arced through the dark, flames bursting against the barn's wall. The sisters woke to the sound of chaos, horses screaming, wood crackling, men's voices howling. "Stay inside!" Samuel roared, grabbing his rifle. But Elena was already pulling on her boots, Marisol at her side. Isabella clung to the edge of the bed, trembling, but Marisol gripped her shoulders. "You'll be safe. Stay low. Don't leave until we call." The door burst open as Samuel fired, the crack of the rifle splitting the night. A raider fell, rolling in the dirt, while others shouted and spread out, torches waving. The barn blazed, smoke rising into the sky, cattle bellowing in panic. Elena snatched a rifle from the wall, her hands unsteady but her jaw tight. Samuel turned sharply, ready to shout her back, but she lifted the weapon and fired, the shot ringing true, driving a raider back from the corral. Samuel's eyes met hers for a heartbeat, and though his jaw was grim, he did not send her away. Marisol swung a pitchfork, catching a man who charged toward the porch. She drove him back with a cry, her strength surprising even herself. The raider cursed, stumbling as Samuel's next shot dropped him where he stood. The yard was chaos. Flames lit the sky, shadows of men darting, horses breaking free, the cries of violence echoing. Elena fought beside Samuel, her fear swallowed by fury. Marisol stood like a wall at the steps, defending Isabella's hiding place. One raider lunged toward Elena, his knife flashing. She froze for an instant, but Samuel was there, shoving her aside, taking the blade across his shoulder. He grunted, his rifle falling as blood darkened his shirt. Elena's scream tore through the air as she fired point blank, the man crumpling at her feet. Samuel staggered, clutching his shoulder. "Stay back," he growled through clenched teeth. But Elena was already at his side, her hands pressed to the wound, her heart pounding. "You're bleeding. You can't." "I can," he snapped. He shoved her gently behind him, lifting his pistol with his other hand, firing into the dark. Isabella, terrified in the house, looked around wildly. The flames were spreading. She darted toward the back door, ignoring Marisol's shouts. She ran to the corral, fumbling with the latch. With trembling hands, she flung it open, releasing the panicked horses. They bolted into the night, scattering raiders and torches alike, the chaos turning against the attackers. Samuel fired his last shot, then swung the pistol like a club against the skull of a man who charged him. Elena, panting, reloaded clumsily and fired again, her arms aching. Marisol drove her pitchfork into another, her cry fierce, her strength unyielding. At last, the shouts faded. The raiders, beaten back, fled into the night, their torches dying as they vanished into the plains. The barn burned, collapsing into a heap of ash and ember, but the house still stood. The sisters gasped for breath, their hands shaking, smoke stinging their eyes. Samuel staggered, his knees buckling. Elena caught him before he fell, her hands stained with his blood. "No, no, stay with me," she cried. His eyes, heavy with pain, met hers. "You did well," he murmured. "Better than I could have asked." She shook her head fiercely, pressing her hand to the wound. "Don't you dare die, not after everything, not after what you've given us." Marisol rushed to fetch water and cloth. Isabella sobbed, clinging to Samuel's other hand, her face pale. Together, the sisters carried him inside, laying him on the bed near the fire. Elena never left his side, her eyes blazing with determination. Through the night, they worked to stop the bleeding, to keep him breathing. Every time Samuel stirred, Elena gripped his hand tighter, whispering, "Stay with me, please. I need you." Outside, the plains grew silent once more. The flames died, leaving only smoke rising into the dawn. The raiders were gone, but their shadow lingered. And in the quiet that followed, the sisters knew their lives had changed again. Samuel had stood for them, bled for them, fought beside them. He was no longer just the man who had bought their freedom. He was theirs. And as Elena sat by his side, her hand never leaving his, she knew the truth she had fought so hard to deny. Her heart no longer feared him. It belonged to him. The ranch smelled of smoke for days after the raid, a bitter scent clinging to the charred remains of the barn. Blackened timbers jutted from the earth like the bones of some giant beast, and the cattle that had survived paced nervously in the scorched corral. The sisters moved through the yard in silence at first, their faces pale, their bodies aching from the battle. Yet beneath the exhaustion lay something fiercer, a stubborn pride, a realization that they had stood against terror and survived. Inside the house, Samuel lay on the bed near the hearth, his shoulder wrapped in cloth that Marisol had bound tight. The wound was deep, angry, but he lived. His breaths came slow, his face pale with pain, yet each rise and fall of his chest was a victory. Elena barely left his side. She sat with her hands folded in her lap during the long hours, her dark eyes fixed on his face, as though willing him to stay in this world. She changed his bandages, cooled his brow, pressed water to his lips when he stirred. On the third night, when the wind rattled the shutters and the fire cast a soft glow across the room, Samuel's eyes opened fully at last. His gaze drifted across the room, finding Elena. For a moment he seemed uncertain if she was real, but then his lips curved faintly. "You should be resting," he murmured, his voice hoarse. Elena leaned closer, her throat tight. "You nearly died. Do you think I could sleep while you fought for your life?" He studied her in silence, his eyes tracing her face as though seeing it for the first time. Then he closed them again, whispering, "You're strong, stronger than you know." She swallowed, her heart aching. "I only learned it from you." The days that followed were filled with both hardship and healing. The barn was gone, the corral damaged, supplies stolen. Yet the sisters worked tirelessly to rebuild what had been taken. Marisol hauled wood alongside Samuel once he was able to rise, refusing to let him strain alone. Isabella tended the animals with steady care, her once timid hands growing surer as she fed and soothed the cattle. And Elena remained at Samuel's side more often than not, though she also kept the house in order, cooking, cleaning, and watching over him with eyes that no longer burned with suspicion, but with something gentler, deeper. The bond between them had shifted. No longer was he only the man who had rescued them, nor they the women he had purchased from cruelty. They had fought together, bled together, shared the weight of survival. A family had been forged in fire and blood. As summer deepened, the ranch began to thrive again. Neighbors came, some bringing planks and nails to help rebuild the barn, others bringing gossip about the raid. The sisters listened quietly as Samuel accepted their help with his usual calm. But when the visitors left, Elena often caught the sharp stares they cast, the muttered words about 3 women under one roof with an old widower. One afternoon, while Samuel rested on the porch, Elena brought him water. He drank slowly, then set the cup aside. "You've been hearing them too," he said. Elena stiffened. "The gossip doesn't matter. It matters enough to trouble you." His gaze was steady, piercing. She lowered her eyes. "They don't know you. They don't know what you've done for us." Samuel's voice softened. "They don't need to know. Only you do." Her heart swelled with unspoken words. She wanted to tell him how her nights were no longer haunted, how his presence steadied her even in silence, how she found herself waiting for his voice, his glance, his rare smile. But fear bound her tongue. She was young, and he carried years like stones on his back. Could such love bridge the gulf between them? Weeks passed, and change came for them all. Marisol, while helping Samuel at the smithy in town, caught the eye of the blacksmith's apprentice. His name was Daniel, a quiet man with strong arms and kind eyes. He admired Marisol's strength, the way she lifted beams without hesitation, the fire in her laughter when she teased Samuel. Soon, Daniel began to visit the ranch, bringing nails or tools under the excuse of work. Marisol, though cautious at first, found her own laughter returning, a spark of warmth lighting her cheeks when Daniel lingered too long in conversation. Isabella, too, found a path unfolding before her. A traveling teacher passed through town, offering lessons to children and young women. Isabella begged to attend, her eyes wide with hunger for knowledge. Samuel agreed, paying the small fee without hesitation. Each week, Isabella returned with her books clutched to her chest, her voice alive as she told her sisters of the wonders she had read. And Elena remained, her heart drawn deeper into Samuel's orbit with every passing day. She walked beside him through the fields, her arm brushing his when they carried water. She tended his wound with gentle hands, scolding him when he worked too hard. Yet her scolding always softened into care. At night, when the others slept, she often lingered at the window, watching him sit alone on the porch, his face turned to the stars. One night, unable to resist, she joined him. The air was cool, the sky ablaze with constellations. Samuel glanced at her as she sat beside him, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "Too quiet." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the crickets, the distant lowing of cattle. Then Elena whispered, "I was afraid of you when we first came here. I thought you were just another man looking to own us." Samuel's eyes remained on the sky. "I know, but you weren't." She turned to him, her voice trembling. "You never were." At last he looked at her, his eyes heavy with something unspoken. "Elena." She leaned closer, her heart pounding. "I don't care what the town says. I don't care about your years or mine. All I know is that when you were bleeding, I thought my heart would stop. I can't imagine this place without you. I don't want to." For a long moment, the night held its breath. Samuel's face was unreadable, carved with lines of loss. Yet his eyes glistened with a light she had never seen before. Slowly, he reached for her hand, his touch rough but tender. "You deserve more than an old man with a broken past," he whispered. Elena shook her head fiercely. "I deserve love, and I found it." The stars wheeled silently overhead as their hands tightened together. From that night forward, their bond deepened. Samuel was cautious, his affection measured, but Elena's heart burned brightly, unashamed. She moved with new ease through the house, laughter returning to her lips. Samuel, though still quiet, no longer carried the same weight of loneliness. The house was alive, filled with warmth and promise. In time, Marisol chose to wed Daniel, her strong hands finding a match in his. Their wedding was small, held beneath the wide sky, with Samuel and Elena standing proudly at her side. Isabella, her eyes shining, read a blessing from one of her books. The day was filled with laughter, and though gossip still clung to the edges of town, no one could deny the joy on Marisol's face. Isabella, too, grew in her own way, her mind hungry, her spirit bold. She announced one evening that she wished to travel with the teacher for a season, to see more, learn more. Samuel agreed, though Elena wept at the thought of her leaving. Isabella hugged them tightly, promising she would return with stories to fill the nights. And when the house grew quiet again, when the echoes of laughter from the wedding faded and Isabella's books lay neatly stacked, Samuel and Elena remained. Alone, yet not lonely. One evening, as the sun sank in a blaze of gold, they sat together on the porch, their hands entwined. The cattle grazed peacefully, the fields stretched wide, and the sky burned with promise. Elena leaned against him, her voice soft. "This is home," she whispered. Samuel pressed a kiss to her hair, his heart full. "Yes," he said, "home." The ranch, once silent with grief, now thrummed with life. Love had rooted itself deep in the soil, stronger than fire, stronger than fear. And as the horizon glowed with the promise of tomorrow, Samuel Callahan and Elena knew that the family they had built out of ashes, and chance would carry them into every dawn to come. From the ashes of hardship, Samuel Callahan and Elena discovered that love can bloom even in the loneliest corners of the frontier. What began as fear and uncertainty became a bond, stronger than fire, stronger than gossip, and stronger than the years that divided them. Together, they built not just a home, but a family, proving that true love always finds its way, no matter the odds. If you enjoyed this heartwarming tale, don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Love Chronicles so you won't miss more stories of passion, resilience, and romance from the untamed frontier.